So welcome everybody to this fireside chat in preparation for ConTech Pharma 2023. Just to give that a plug, we will be meeting on the 2nd of March 2023 in a hybrid fashion, both online at the Sheraton Skyline Hotel, London Heathrow. And you can access the website there at ConTech Live to register your interest to be a speaker. So we're going to be talking about some of the key themes that will be driving forward at the conference. And I would like to introduce the co-chairs who will be having a conversation and a fireside chat with me today. So moving across the screen, I would like to introduce Peter Woollard, who's the Data Standards Biocurator at the EBI, European Bioinformatics Institute.
Right, hi.
And moving across the screen, I should like to introduce Jane Lomax, Head of Ontologies at SciBite. And moving further on, I'd like to introduce Martin Romacker, who's the Senior Principal Scientist in Scientific Solution Engineering and Architecture at Roche. And finally, to introduce Hans Constandt. He is a well-known advisor, mentor, and expert in digital health.
Hello, everyone.
So thank you everyone for joining. And just to kind of recap, these are the themes and some of the background information for the ConTech Pharma 2023 event. The themes are, number one, what we call a virtuous circle, from real-world data via preclinical data to analytics, and back to treatments in the clinic, including manufacturing. So really the general topic of things like translational medicine and how we close the loop on bringing treatments to the world. Secondly, we'll be talking about aligning semantics across clinical and preclinical applications and the challenges that are faced there. And then finally, we'll also be touching on standards that are coming into force in the coming months, particularly the IDMP standard, and talking about some of the issues that are relevant to that. And in the background to all of this, the theme from last year's conference, ConTech Pharma 2022, is the notions of fair data standards. So we'll be touching on that. But I wanted to kick off with the first topic, which is this virtuous circle, and try and get your thoughts on how you would characterize this, and in more detail, how various types of data can contribute to the best outcomes. So, panel, thoughts on that? Does anybody want to start? And can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, maybe I can start with the first part of the question. I mean, coming from a pharma organization, where of course we work in all of these various areas, I think there is a lot of interest now to make the connection, to really make this virtuous circle usable. And also on the side note to FAIR, I think we're also going to take an approach here to verify the various repositories. I mean, today you have to say that possibly some of these of the parts of the circle, like the real-world data, the clinical or the preclinical data, and also what you do in analytics, they are quite organized in themselves. But I think we haven't paid too much attention so far to really close this circle and ensure, in particular, interoperability across the boundaries. There are some initiatives going on that are supposed to help here. I think we'll possibly cover some of those again in this panel here. But for example, I've been also on the Fire for Fair initiative, where we're looking into ways to or recommendations to make fair fire profiles fair. And I think it's in particular at the borderlines of these various domains where you need to put a lot of work. Or another topic which I think is also has been discussed quite intensively these days at Roche is how do you connect, for example, OMOP, ODC standard with clinical standards that are coming from CDISC. I think we have here a variety of standards. I think these are mainly not interoperable. So on the one hand, I would say there's clearly a recognition of the high business value. On the other side, I think we still have to make huge investments to close the boundaries within the circle.
Thanks, Martin.
I can follow up on that if that's okay, Jabe.
Great, yes, please.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting, right? And the question is also intriguing. The reason why is I came from a bioinformatics, biotech, molecular biology background, right, and academics. Then indeed I worked 10 years in pharma, right, from the early bioinformatics to cheminformatics, toxinformatics, and then later on clinical trial data. We didn't talk yet about real-world evidence, right? We had an extra arm in the clinical trials to find standard of care, so that was not the case yet. And then I was 10 years in a startup scale-up working on semantics of data. It was first 5-star open data principles applied to internal data, and then it became fair data, right? The findability, accessibility, interoperability of data. And to make the loop here right now, I exited my company there, and now I'm working for like nearly a year now, a little bit less, 8 months, for the government, the Belgian government, and also the European Commission. So, which is a pretty strange move, to be honest, working from the government, but it is so magnificent. The reason why is there's so much data around there, and the problem is we have the data, we know the value, but why is it so damn difficult to make it happen? And so that's where I want to make the circle here on the question, right? You say real world data and real world evidence, we know what that stands for. It's like the data outside of the clinical trials, I would say, if I can define it like that. But you know, clinical trial data right now is only 3% of all patients, not all people, all patients. So 3% is what we cover with clinical trial data, and we know the quality. So good luck to going to clinicaltrials.gov and cleaning it up. And how standardized is it, and how much work does it take? And the problem is somewhere you got PDFs, but originally there was data. So why do we mess up our own system with needing to reverse engineer, right? And that's only clinical trial data. So it's imaging data, clinical signs and symptoms, laboratory tests, and so on. But then the real world data sources, right? Which is the registries that are out there, health insurance claims and billing, electronic health records, paper healthcare records, health surveys. And now even more mobile apps. I just had a talk with MedTech Belgium, right? With the mobile apps, so much data's out there. So I think the problem is it's a little bit, yeah, paradoxical, because we have a lot of pretty good data, but we can't access it. And when we want to access it, we go to the PDFs. Like when you are a mobile app, for instance, you have a lot of data. You have the signs, maybe 1,000 lines per second, maybe 10,000 lines per second, ones and zeros. Well, you know, there's a lot of noise in there. So first of all, how do you reduce the noise to really get to the insights? And then once you have the insights, how do you make them fair, right? Findable, accessible, interoperable. What standards do you use? And then you share that. So ultimately, there's maybe a PDF that goes in the EPD of the hospital to help you as a patient. But everything else is lost. So there, I think we need to do better in the layering of data, but also the ownership of data, which is a tricky one, and then applying the FAIR principles to that to make data more available for the patient and for the other stakeholders.
So,
I mean, sorry.
Okay, so one of the really positive things I've seen recently, and this came out of the horrible COVID-19 pandemic, is there's been lots of collections and basically clinical observations of things and collecting all the evidence. And I've seen in the conferences and talks, a lot of the academics themselves are starting to really standardize data. They're really thinking about standards. So to me, there's positives that are coming through.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, even within something like clinical trials, though, you would have thought that something that's fairly structured, like ct.gov, you know, and that feels like low-hanging fruit, right? So it's structured, but, you know, there's no semantics applied there. There's no sort of standardization of inclusion, exclusion criteria, that kind of thing. And that's something that, you know, a lot of people are doing in parallel. They're having to sort of normalize that. So, you know, that would be one easy place to start. I mean, I think for the preclinical world, I think the kind of, from a semantics point of view, at least, you know, the alignment is much better, but I think it's making that leap, isn't it, between that preclinical space and the clinical space, which is the, you know, the tricky bit.
Because even in that, I remember you got SEN standards can be different to C-disc standards when species naming, for example.
Yeah.
And also we need to get in reality, right? So I talk also now quite a bit to hospitals, and then you have 300,000 terms, and you give these terms to 3 physicians, and you have 2 hours discussion what term to choose. So we need to really go into reality. It's about how easy is this to use, and to use is not just a tool, right? But really understanding what we need to do with it. And another aspect, I think, let's say as an angel investor right now, I said, don't do anything in healthcare because it's so nice, but it's so damn tough, right? Because healthcare, when you go to the bioinformatics, I love bioinformatics, I love biology, but you know, it is tough, right? It is extremely complex. It's not like selling shoes and picking the right color, right? It is not that kind of e-commerce that's simple to understand. This goes into the human body with polygenetic trees and all of that stuff, right? Even one gene can have alternative splicing. So knowing the concept and understanding is one thing, having the data is too, but then standardizing it is easy to say, but not so easy to do. So I think there are too many standards. I think linking standards is a problem. Understanding a standards is a problem. How do you make standards better is a problem. And then the linkage between standards, and not just the linkage between data, but even the linkage between standards is an issue.
I mean, if I just may pick up the point from James, I have also currently looked into clinicaltrials.gov, which is indeed a structured resource. I mean, you have a good tagging system, but even though this is something which is machine readable, it is not at all machine actionable because the semantics are missing. And this is the case in most places. And I also have to say, also looking in or being a part of this fair and harmonizing and standardization journey for quite a while, I also have the concern that the knowledge space, as also Hans has outlined, is getting more and more out of control. So we have more volume of data, we have more data types, we have a higher variety. And instead, as converging, as you have said, you know, less standards, more harmonization, we are still adding complexity. We have, if you go to fair sharing, for example, we have now 1,600 standards. It was a 20% growth in the last 2.5 years. So I think if we really want to get this virtuous circle into place, we need a master plan. And I think there are many components to this master plan. I think we, of course, have to have this master plan as an industry. I think we also need to work heavily with, say, commercial content providers or service organizations, which are also on the call. Definitely have to include academia. And last but not least, also now where Hans is active, I also just came back this week from the European Open Science Cloud Conference. There is a lot of things going on in the European Union, US, and in governmental space. But this is, you know, it's just going around and it's not converging. I think we are piling up initiatives. We are still proliferating. So on the one hand, I think everybody has a sense of this strong business case. But I think what we are really lacking is a strategy, an overarching strategy across all the parties that I've mentioned to really get this done and get this in place. And I strongly do believe that verification is the right way. But then when we really want to verify, we also need to look into standards. And now looking on one of the topics that's also going to come up on the panel later, looking into IDMP, this is just another standard in manufacturing. And also as a part of IDMP, you have the so-called SPORE model, where you also have the referentials. And this is just a repetition of things that we already have in CDISC to 80%. So why are we doing this over and over again? And the answer to this question is because we don't have a master plan as a community. So I think we definitely need to act here and to join forces to really get this in place, because I think if we really have this virtuous circle in place, the outcomes that we can generate, the new insights, linking real-world data with clinical data, being able to do this seamlessly without massive data integration projects slowing us down, this will be fantastic. But we have a lot of work ahead of us, and it really doesn't only require people infrastructure, it also requires a master plan, a master strategy.
So, I mean, I guess one question around that is, what is the best way to try and get that strategy in place? And as you say, Martin, just trying to do that without bringing forth yet another initiative is the challenge, isn't it? I mean, obviously there are routes like the Pistoia Alliance, setting up a project through that. I don't know, any thoughts from anybody about how we might, work towards getting that sort of master initiative in place?
No, I think it can only really be done via the regulators, can't it? Because these are, that's who's imposing the standards. So it can only really be done by, the collaboration of the community with those regulatory bodies. I don't know how I don't know how you do that.
I mean, I really have to say, I mean, having worked in many of these different areas, I think we also have a kind of a community problem, because to a certain extent, and please forgive me, this also applies to the people here and on the call, to a certain extent, we stay in our bubble, we talk amongst each other, and I think we're pretty much on the same page. And if you look into your organizations, also mine, I think we really need to put more emphasis on placing the message at the level in the management that, on the one hand, is able to take decisions, but is then also able to drive this. And there is still a huge gap of understanding. I really appreciate, for example, the work that Hans and colleagues have done to work a bit on the ROI discussion. I think this helps a lot. But I think that in classical IT organizations, and there was also some reflections from Peter around this before, we really still think in terms of systems, applications, platform. Even though we are claiming we are data driven, we are data centric, we don't live it, because most of the people don't understand the heavy implications that go deep in the way how we work with our data and how we want to design our data management value chains to really implement data mastery. And we really have to get a little bit out of our, bubble, if I may say so, and try to heavily help mutually support us in finding the right arguments, finding the right people, and really being able to communicate the business value, the impact, and the outcome. And if we have this support, I think then we can really start to set up such a master plan. And of course, the regulatory authorities are a part of it, and we have to handle them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see that from the other side. I think that's right, Martin, because obviously we work with a lot of pharma and sort of see their kind of, their sort of move towards, sort of digitization, and, verification within, for a particular use case is common, but, sort of stretching that out beyond and having a kind of enterprise fair environment is a long way away, I think, for most pharma right now.
Well, maybe I can add to that, so Martin also, because what you're saying is exactly what I'm trying to do. So when you look up the definition of the question here, a virtuous circle, maybe we should explain that, right? It's kind of this recurrent cycle of events, right? And each result of each one should bring a benefit to the next one, right? And that's what we try to do here. And another thing I'm going to say, coming back to your statement, Peter, in fact, the data spaces in Europe are there, right? So Europe really thinks this way. That's why I love how they think. But it also comes with a pain. And I think you also alluded earlier to that, some of the speakers here, right? So because first of all, when you want to do the right thing, it will take more time. That's a problem. And you can say, for instance, I'll do a passive flourish. Probably I won't make friends, but I'm an open person here, and apologies if I upset people with provoking. But economy in 6 was like 12 years ago. Was in the US they create, in China they duplicate, and in Europe we regulate. And my point is here is like in China, for instance, the government owns your data and you don't have privacy, yeah? And it's a persiflage. In the US, there's privacy, but the tech companies want to own your data. Is that correct or not? We can debate of it. And in Europe, with the European health data spaces, they really want to say, no, the individual is in control of that data. So they want the individual to own the data, which is philosophically correct, like GDPR is philosophically correct, but that comes with a huge pain. And now the world is following with GDPR. So I think the same is happening. So to come back to the policymakers, and I work now for the Belgian government, but I'm also aligning with the European health data spaces with the member states, what's happening in Denmark, what's happening in the Netherlands, Health RI, what's happening in Sweden and other countries. Every country has its parts. And to that point, the other aspect is, I think, why the European health data space took health and not the European retail spaces, because the impact in health is huge. We've seen it in COVID, right? Having good data at your fingertips is huge. And Peter, you said it also. I'm going to quote Churchill 2 times. First, never waste a good crisis. So the aspect of COVID was in our face. We need to be better at digital, and you saw it. We did tests at home, right? The schools changed drastically here in Belgium because e-health learning was kind of mainstream. And the kids and the teachers did really well. So there's some digitization that helps, some digital transformation, which is really great. The second thing, I'm going to quote Winston Churchill a second time. It is so damn tough, right? And this is not a quote, but legislation is needed to do the right thing, but that takes years. When I look at the timelines, it's in 3 years we will have it. So we cannot wait for that, but we need it. So for me, it's kind of finding the balance. And that's, I think, also why I really appreciate our, I would say, the government here in Belgium, because they took the risk to take an entrepreneur in the lead of setting up the Belgian Health Data Authority, right? Which I'm doing right now. And the point is, I think we need to also, and now I'm quoting Churchill, is we need, and this is the virtual circle, in my opinion, we need success. Winston Churchill said, success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. And I think some people around the table already know me. Enthusiasm is crucial, right? It's like optimism is a moral duty. So the challenge we take on, being health, being data, the sensitivity of data. When you talk about data, you don't want your data that your insurer knows this, or that you can't get a job because you know you're going to die in 2 years, right? So it's so sensitive, so complex data, and we need to move forward. So what I'm saying here is, yes, Martin, we need not just the pharma. I think the pharma was spearheading, and even I'm going back to the question here, the preclinical, it was in the bioinformatics space. It was not in clinical trials that we started with FAIR and all of that stuff. It started in the bioinformatics space, right? We still remember the first semantic events, right? Very at the beginning with Web 3.0 and semantic web and 5-star data and RDF and all of that stuff. And then we were too technical, we were the technical geeks. Then now we got to FAIR, which kind of explains it better, right? Because that's easier to explain than RDF, right? And turtle files and what it can do. So we're there, but now it's exactly as Martin said. I think the pharma really have a lot of expertise. I'm looking what Eden, for instance, does with Odyssey and OMOP. This is the way forward, right? And they're helping hospitals to verify the data, to make it interoperable, to make it usable, to make it useful for secondary use. But the point here is we need the policymakers. And I think the European health data spaces is an ally, but it's a difficult ally. Because right now, I think 80% is set by, I would say, probably legal people and governance people, right? And we need also the technical people, the plumbers, right? I think, Martin, you know, that's Jane also, right? And Peter, we're also the plumbers. We try to do this stuff. And the problem there is, Martin, and this is for me also the virtual circle, we need to be careful. We need to engage them. But sometimes they're too far away from reality. And this comes back what we said, return of investment, ROI. I think we really need to explain well is why do we do what we do? So there's a difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And effectiveness is we're going to do this because we think it's right. We need to transform our digitization, right? We need to be better. Efficiency, as we've got 2 billion, where are we going to spend it? Why are we going to spend the money rightly? And I think we need to find a balance there to really do things with fair data. And we need to share the learnings better to really do that and to, as Martin also said, for me, the first 3 months was about explaining what is it, informing. I think we miss out on the educative aspect, on the change management to explain people. And that's where use cases are important. And I would say even say showcases and return of investment. why did we do this verification project? How much did it cost? How many resources were there? How much time did it take? And it's not about another IT program. We shouldn't be a cost center. We should be a profit center, a strategic partner. And that's where the ROI comes in, the return. You spend this money, but what did you create with it? I don't want to tell them how much it cost. I want to say how much we saved. Did we bring a drug closer to market? Do we have now a pipeline where we're more efficient? And this is what we need to show. So I think the focus is less on technology, less on standards, but it's really on explaining people really what this is about, why, what investment is needed, and what return we can expect. And that's what we need to explain better. So our ROI for me is key in here.
And I think in a way, we need to shift the conversation from arguing, why should we spend the money and do this, against what is the cost of not doing it? And the cost of not doing it is, is kind of huge, but, that's, how do we move the conversation to that point?
I think this is a very important point you're making here, Jabe, and I already spent some time on this. And my typical observation is that is this disjointness of data producers and data consumers, right? And also thinking about the costs of not having fair data. I think the key issue here is that that these costs are to a certain extent invisible, because they are downstream. Someone else has to pay for it. Someone else needs to hire a team of data engineers, a team of software engineers that then read in the data, ETL, buy tools to semantically enrich them, and then make them available for further dissemination. That's the encouraging message around verification, and we have evidence for this. That if we do verification at the very beginning, we can save all of these efforts. And there was a thread on LinkedIn. Some of them might also have seen them, where the question was asked, how do we convince people to really give us the money, the budget, to make our data interoperable? And I think also based on your statement, Jabe, you have to invert this question. Where do we get the money from for this eternal hamster wheel of ETL, map and merge, integration, and so on and so forth? I've recently heard some numbers in a talk where someone said this really goes up to 40% of the IT budgets are bound to transformation and integration. And this is something that you can really evitate if we really follow down the path of true fair, making data really fair, working also with identifiers. Of course, we have to neglect, say, the technical discourse here to convince people. But the core message is that at the end of the day, if you look at the overall picture, the costs of not being interoperable are ways higher, and paying this amount of money to make your data fair at the beginning, to make your systems fair by design, and to ensure that your data are born fair. These are ways smaller than what we have to pay alongside the data management value chain. But as it goes into different budget pockets, this relationship is not visible.
And no, I completely agree with that. I'd say actually go back even further. A lot of the people generating the data to start with, they actually need help and advice on being able to do this, because everybody wants to work hard and you won't get value from it. But what a lot of people see is just hurdles in getting their data so it can be moved on, and the people just do the minimum. If you have people local to them who actually understand what you're doing and why, that can often help them give that advice. And then okay, so they then do it, they give the right metadata, and it's done. And you've probably got to, almost with Circle, you've got to at a later stage go back to them and say, look, this is what you've done, this is how you've helped really improve it and help the whole community.
I think this is a fantastic comment, and I can only completely confirm it. And if I may be a little bit reflect a little bit on the Roche perspective, I think that the 2 points that Hans and Peter you made is exactly why we have been pretty successful bringing in FAIR into our organization at scale. So one is demonstrating value alongside with your implementation, not having a 5 years perspective and say, okay, by then we were able to demonstrate value. Really implement a new feature, use it, show the value. And the other point is indeed the colleagues who are responsible for data acquisition, data capture, or data generation, they need support from FAIR experts that help them really to set up their terminologies, their metadata, and eventually also their ontologies in the right way. This is a profession. This is something that requires professional training, and you cannot expect from a workbench scientist, for example, that they know how to craft a well-formed terminology, a well-formed resource. And if you do both, and you really accompany the people alongside of their FAIR journey, I think you can really build the building blocks that would allow us to make this virtuous circle true over time.
And it sort of goes beyond the actual organization itself, right? Because, you know, if you're a farmer, you're bringing in data from external sources as well. So you're bringing in, you know, clinical trials data, you're bringing data from like CROs and from, you know, like publishers potentially. So, you know, I think the expectation has to be that those, you know, that the data that's coming from there as well is also fair, because, you know, otherwise you're just compounding the problem. You've got extra tasks to have to do inside, as well as, you know, verifying your own data.
I think there's a couple of nice themes here. I mean, when you were speaking, Peter, I was thinking, you know, sometimes it's easy to put things in context when you have people close by one another who are working. And what we're trying to achieve is that kind of visibility much more widely across the community, which is hard. And then the other component to this is the ROI, the return on investment, and making that kind of narrative, that story of the benefits from one project feeding into another project and benefiting from that, making that tangible in terms of quantitative terms as well. Those two things I think could be very powerful.
And probably an example of where there's been a bit of a virtuous circle was when I heard some people talking from orchestra, right, where a lot of them have been involved with one set of studies, and then COVID came along and they were able to reuse a lot of the lessons they'd learned from the previous time to get better terms and things. So it just improves. Yeah. And then they kindly communicated that to lots of different organizations.
I mean, maybe a good approach to this is trying to capture those sorts of stories, those sorts of illustrations that we can use when we communicate. Because I think that is the thing, trying to capture that big picture of, you know, is kind of where we're going with FAIR, the big picture of reusing from project to project. We're making that real by saying, well, look, here is a project where these things were done and this data was captured. And then further down the line, here is another project that really benefited from those insights and that data to do something very different, and look at what that's saved in terms of potential costs. And then imagine doing that at scale. And it's like, if we can find some really good case studies to bring it to life, that might help all of us. Because, you know, people often, only by seeing something really tangible do they get the whole picture. And I think all of you have kind of pointed out the risk is being, you know, with us on the more technical side, getting too drawn into the techie discussions. And that's just not something that carries weight with most of the audience. You need these tangible, real stories.
It goes beyond just ROI as well, you know, because unless you've got your data in a reasonable kind of state, you're not going to be able to leverage the newer technology. So your AI isn't going to work unless you've got that kind of that fair base of data to start with in the first place. And you know, there's been some notable failures in that area.
Yeah, I mean the whole story about rubbish in, rubbish out is a bit of a hackneyed story, but I think you're right. It's kind of, it's building on that more. There's a lot of potential for machine learning, but it really is building those aggregate sets of data that you can then use for feature engineering. And it's at that point where this, I don't know, economies of scale, but really building on other projects becomes most powerful. And I think that really is a kind of at a nascent stage. And actually that really, you know, there's huge amounts of potential there, but there's a huge gap because of the state of data, what we could be doing.
I think we also see a huge gap in communication, which goes back to Jane's comment, is that I think we don't tell our success story frequently enough, and also with the right emphasis. I mean, at Roche, I can definitely say we have strong evidence and successful projects that show that FAIR works at scale. For example, we have a system which is called Edison that was also once introduced at the Pistoia Alliance. One of the Pistoia Alliance webinars is that where all data that we get from CROs is verified when we read it in. It's a very, very sophisticated system where all the FAIR resources, the terminologies, the schema, the CDIS standards and everything is managed centrally outside of the data processing system. And as the data flows in, it becomes FAIR. And this really saves us a lot of money. So these things are really work. But when you go outside and you look, okay, what are the news that are announced? You go to LinkedIn, you go to your internal. We also have a media ticker or so. You always find messages. Oh yeah, there were 3 new targets discovered because there was a deep learning approach on something. But you never read any success story. Oh, we did discover here 3 new targets because Peter has done a fantastic curation job at the EBI. So all this work with data is something which is not noble and completely undervalued. And I think this is possibly a task that has to go alongside with, you know, communication. It's really making clear that data is at the heart of everything. We start with data, in between we have data, and we end up with data. Yeah. And this is not in the DNA of the people who are taking decisions, and it's of course also not fancy enough or not hyped enough. But once I gave a talk, which was a couple of years ago, where we say data first, yeah. And this data first message, I think this is not yet in the heart of our organizations, and most of the people don't see it. So we have also to work on a strong perceptual change here.
I had so many colleagues in the past that sort of almost analysis first. I want to get to the results. Yeah,
that's the fun. That's the fun bit, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's it's one of those truisms that people get really excited about. I don't know, big technology. Like people talk about deep learning. People talk about this exciting stuff called artificial intelligence. But as I always say, really, that's just function optimization. I mean, machine learning is just like plotting the graph on the data. So it is all about data. Machine learning is all about data, nothing else. And so you're absolutely right. The focus needs to be on the data, and you know, creating the right features. Then you can run your function optimization and answer your questions. But it's all about data.
Yeah, but we need to be careful also there, right? So I also always said data first. Martin, we've been in panels before in many years, and with other people also, Jane and colleagues also there. Because I used to slide with the horse behind the cart, right? Because you want to do your AI, but your data is not right. Secondly, I think they compare data with oil, which is kind of bad, right? Because oil is not such a nice resource. And in fact, they did it because we also underestimate data. And what I say is they think data science is sexy. Well, it's not so sexy, right? We know 80% of the time is in curating the data and cleansing the data, and that's not a fancy job, right? So I think we really, and that's why it was called, because data needs refinery before it can be used. But I think we need to evolve to data, and it was, I think it was in the Times at some point, this is a super nice resource, right? Because when you share it, it's not gone. And we need to think about that data first principle and name it the right way, because when I enrich my data, it's my data. I can share my data with you. You can enrich it. I benefit from it, right? It's not gone. It's not like in my car and it's gone and it's even making our planet dirtier, right? So we need to think about data first principle, but data as an asset, as an extremely valuable resource, and that's why it needs attention. So that's one thing. And then secondly, I think we always need to be careful, and I made a mistake over and over and over and over again to go too much into the data, the AI, the tech side, is always make sure that it is clear for the people who make the decisions. And that's not, I might even say sometimes not even your CIO, right? It's really, it's a therapeutic areas, right? So you need to be careful to know who's your decision maker, and then you need to be able to tell the story. That's why also as an entrepreneur, I started to pitch, right? Well, in the beginning, I was miserable at it because I pitched the tech. No, you need to pitch the benefits. And that's the showcases we need. And as Jane said, yes, ROI is one thing, but ROI is kind of the metrics. Yes, it will take 1 year with 10 people. That's 1 million. And then in 2 years, I will save 2 million. Great, nice. But I think it goes beyond that. I think, and this is what I do now with the health data. It's not authority, it's agency, by the way, in Belgium, health data agency with the government, and it's really multi stakeholders, right? It's defining the personas and defining the what's in it for me, what's in it for the patient, what's in it for the researcher. We need to explicitly say this in human words, in words that, and we need to explain it as these showcases, because that's where you say, oh, as a patient, you're doing this with my data. Okay, I understand. So it's explaining these things like secondary use of health data. So primary use of health data is when you're in the hospital, you help you. But when I needed 2 therapies and the 3rd therapy was a good one, well, now I know it in my data. I anonymize it or pseudonymize it, and it's fair. So anybody with kind of my phenotype or genotype can go to treatment tree. So wow, I'm not 2 months in the hospital, but I'm only 1 week in the hospital because I had the right treatment, right? And secondly, wow, I didn't have to pay 3 times. So we saved costs. And thirdly, wow, I'm not 3 months in the hospital and I'm not off the market in 1 year, but I'm economically viable. And that's what we need to explain people. And that's really the showcases, is by verifying data, by making my data available. And look at it as donating blood. I don't give blood to get money for it. I give blood for 2 reasons. Is it probably can help people, and when I give it, you don't feel it. And when I need blood, it'd be great to have blood somewhere. But you don't want money for this. And I think with data, we need to have the same principles. It's not selling the data, but making the data fair, making the data accessible, interoperable, reusable, and then showcase, say, Hans, your data was shared, and that's missing, by the way, in the informed consent. Because informed consent, people don't know they've signed it. They don't know what's in it, sorry to say so. And then they don't know what's been done, because in the informed consent, you should also state, I think, that what has been done with the data, what benefit, and that's, I'm sorry to say so, missing. I don't know what happened with my data in my hospital. And that would be nice to say, and I don't need to know who had my blood and was it a person who was saved, like when I'm an organ donor, but it'd be nice to say so many blood was given and so many people were saved with that effect. And these stories is exactly the ones we need to tell. It's the business stories, the real life stories to show the value, and not just the money and the tech stories.
Yeah. I love that analogy, Hans, of the data as blood. And just going back to that analogy you were talking about with fuel, data as fuel, I always counter that, rather than saying data is not fuel to your Ferrari or your Mercedes or whatever it is. The data, when you build it into analytics, becomes the engine. But actually, that's the analogy you need to be reaching for. And I think that sometimes helps people shift their perspective a little bit. You know, when you construct a deep learning algorithm with features, the features that structure that machine learning network, that is the engine. That's the data. It's not fuel. It's much more important than that. So I think
I really like this this analogy, because I mean, I think that the oil idea was really crafted because they say all this the industrial revolution that was driven by the oil then resulted in a lot of transformation in society and economics. But I think in terms of really thinking about an asset, I think it's very valuable, because oil is also something that you use and then goes away, right? But the engine of a car is something that really drives your motion, and you stop your car and you can go there again, and then you can still make use of your engine. And this is about reusability, right? Yeah. Oil is not reusable, and at least until now. Whoever invents it might be a rich man, but currently it's not possible. So I think that I really like this analogy, and I also feel a very strong consent here is that we have to move away a little bit from, say, I mean, we all know this tech stuff, we're insiders, but I think it's not about convincing mutually ourselves. It's say, how do we, as a community, how do we stand together as we're all having the same vision, as we're all working on a lot of stuff which are completely pre-competitive? How do we get together, and how do we articulate the right messages that we can really reach the people who are either owning the data, so patients or so, but more importantly, the decision makers that sit on budgets and strategic decisions. I think this is, I have the same learning than you here, Hans, by the way. I'm also completely shifting out of this and try really to, of this more tech dialogue, and really try to say, okay, what do I have to do to convince the people to make the investment? The question is not about what technology do you use, it's about what is in it for me.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin. I think maybe this is a great time to kind of like reach out to the folks who'll be listening to this. People who are, you know, our audience now, they're listening to this, they're saying, I wish I could jump into this conversation now and make this point that I'd be just like dying to say. I'm really, you know, on the edge of my seat. And that's exactly what we'll be doing at this conference, at the ConTech Pharma 2023 conference. So if you're listening to this and you have something to contribute, either as a speaker or as a part of the conference itself, please, I will just, I shall move to the, if I go the right way, which I'm struggling to talk and act at the same time. If you're listening to this and you wish to speak, then go to the ConTech Live website to register as a speaker, and also to register as a participant in the conference. And I have to say, I'm really energized by this conversation that we've had today. I really want to thank all of you for your time and your contribution today. And I'm so excited about carrying this forward and trying to build on the things we've talked about today, because it's so important to our future that we are able to address this, to move beyond this kind of like limitations of proliferation of standards and everything, and actually get to this virtuous circle, because it is so meaningful to people's lives, to get to the treatments, to get to, you know, on a human level, all those millions of people that right as we speak today are suffering with all kinds of diseases and health problems, that if we get our act together, we can alleviate and solve and alleviate that suffering that millions of people are having. So it's a great privilege to be able to be in a position where we can work towards that. And yeah, I would just like to thank you all again for your contribution, and looking forward to the meeting in March.
Thanks a lot to everybody. Thanks for having us.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you
Great
all.
to see some of the people here again. Talk to you later.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.